And with that said, let's meet our speakers today. So my name is Colin Contrary. I'm the person currently talking. I am the head of content here at Embrace, and I'm so fortunate to be joined by another Embracian. Colin, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, nice to be here. My name is Colin Anderson. Sometimes my friends call me C Daddy. I am happy to be here, and I help customers and prospects learn how to best use Embrace as a tool.
Awesome. And so let's get started. So let's cover, first of all, why you are here today. So you're here today because you work in mobile and you want to deliver the best mobile experiences to your users. However, if your team is relying exclusively or even mostly on Firebase Crashlytics for monitoring the technical performance of your mobile app, you're realizing there are sizable gaps that limit your team's ability to proactively address the issues that are impacting your users and business. So in this webinar, we're going to cover what those gaps are, why they're an issue, and how a more powerful platform like Embrace can provide the visibility needed to continually ship amazing mobile experiences. So with that, we are going to have a demo later on in the webinar, but just to give you some context about Embrace, we are a platform that helps engineers build better mobile experiences. So at a high level, our goal is to provide you with all the data you need to proactively address any issue within your mobile app. So to compare, while Firebase Crashlytics focuses on collecting individual events like crashes and errors, we collect 100% unsampled mobile data from 100% of user experiences. So what that means is anytime a user uses your app, we collect all the entire user journey, every network call that happens, every log, every device state change, whether they're connected to Wi-Fi, whether they're running out of memory, whether the CPU is pegging, all that data, so that no matter what the issue is, you have complete data to understand, prioritize, and resolve any issue. So you can think of it as if the focus of Crashlytics is on solving crashes and errors, Embrace's focus is on optimizing your entire user experience. And we'll get into more later. So let's cover the agenda, what we're covering today. So first, we're going to cover some key findings from a recent survey we conducted with mobile engineers, where they talked about their biggest pain points in building mobile apps. Then we're going to share a little bit about what mobile teams tell us each and every day that are the limits that they come up against when they're relying heavily on Firebase Crashlytics. Then we're going to have Colin Anderson do an Embrace demo, and he'll cover 3 key ways that Embrace can help you deliver better mobile experiences. And finally, we'll wrap up and we'll show kind of what Colin showed in the demo in a case study. And so we'll explain how the Embrace product actually helped a big e-commerce marketplace platform to better proactively address issues and improve their app performance. So with that said, we did a survey where we reached out to 1,300 people working in mobile. This is the breakdown. So 50% of it were engineers. We also have some more senior titles in engineering and also some higher level manager titles, but the vast majority of people were engineers. And what did they tell us? When we asked, what are your biggest complaints about Firebase and Firebase Crashlytics? The #1 response was that there's just not enough functionality to solve specialty issues. So we know this, Crashlytics is dedicated to crashes, but if you have app freezes, or otherwise known as ANRs, memory issues, if there's issues with networking in your endpoints, anything outside of crashes and simple errors, Crashlytics is not going to be able to provide you that visibility. The #2 answer that they gave was that they didn't like the data limitations. So Crashlytics samples data. You're not going to get 100% of the crash reports or 100% of the error reports. They sample what they give you, and also you are rate limited. So if issues happen at certain spikes and periods of time, you might only get a subset of the total data for each of those issues. And so when we also talked to people in this survey, we asked, which of these frustrate you the most in your day-to-day work? And the #1 answer was spending too long fixing bugs. So this is the biggest pain point in terms of building and releasing high quality mobile experiences, is just the amount of time engineers have to spend troubleshooting issues. The second answer was having too many systems and processes to follow. And we'll get into that, because if you rely heavily on Firebase Crashlytics, you're probably stitching together visibility across multiple tools, right? Maybe you have Crashlytics and you have a separate logging tool or a separate networking tool, or you're piecing together analytics from a separate platform, or using some of your backend data from your observability solution. So hopscotching between tools is another pain point. And so the survey is telling us that it's frustrating engineers to spend so much time solving issues, and Firebase Crashlytics data is limited. So let's now cover some of the limits of Firebase Crashlytics that we hear each and every day when we directly talk to mobile teams. And there's 4 main limits that people share with us. So the first is that Firebase Crashlytics is great for solving basic crashes, but this doesn't scale. So when your app is growing more complex, when you have more engineers constantly iterating, shipping new features, doing A/B tests, when the size of your app and team grows, crashes is not the only thing you care about. You're really focusing on performance and optimizing all places in the app. And so Crashlytics is not going to be able to provide you that visibility. The second is Firebase Crashlytics does not have the concept of a user experience, right? It's stack traces, and you can attach breadcrumbs to the stack traces, but that's giving you a finite window of visibility into what the issue was. So for example, if you have a user submit a ticket, you can't look up that user complaint and review every single detail of what happened in that session and all subsequent sessions. You don't have the visibility to see exactly where an issue could have started, for example, in the background or much earlier in the session, and then a crash happened at the very end of the session, right? Firebase is really about giving you crash reports and then a few breadcrumbs leading up to it. The third is sampling data. So Firebase rate limits the data it collects, and it also samples data, so you're not getting 100% of the picture. And so what does that mean? Customers tell us that with Firebase, it's impossible to see the full impact of issues that they discover. And so they're having a difficult time prioritizing which ones to address because they're not really sure exactly which ones are the most pressing because there's a lack of data. And the fourth is it doesn't provide data in real time. So for example, it's difficult to mitigate the impact of regressions, whether that's in your own code base, an outage in your backend or with a third-party vendor. It's difficult to make quick changes if you're A/B testing features or running marketing experiments with push notifications if you have a delay in when you're getting data in your system. So the closer to real time you get, the better equipped you are to make the best decisions to optimize that end user experience. So these are the 4 main limits of Firebase Crashlytics that customers and prospects and just mobile teams in general share with us each and every day. And so now that we've covered at a high level what some of the limits of Firebase Crashlytics are, we'd like to show you what more powerful visibility looks like in Embrace. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Colin Anderson to walk us through a demo.
Great. So what we're going to cover in the demo today, first of all, we're going to cover gaining complete context. Right now, a lot of that's lacking with Crashlytics, right? Things are all over the place. How do we bring them all together? Second, how do we surface every cause of poor app performance? App performance is a big deal. Like Colin talks about, crashes, of course, are important. We care about those, but it's not the only indicator of how the app is and if people are frustrated. And thirdly, I will cover proactively addressing issues. How can we be the first to know rather than waiting on data that's often delayed by up to 12 or 24 hours like it is in Crashlytics, right? How can we address that? So those are 3 things we'll cover today in this demo.
All right, let's get to it.
All right, so where we're going to start first, like I said on the previous slide, we're going to cover how we can gain complete context. The way we gain complete context inside Embrace, like Colin said, we capture every single user session. So anytime a user is in the foreground in your app, that counts as a user session. What you're seeing on this page is 2 different user sessions. Here's the session we're looking at, and you can see there's a flag, so I know there's some sort of problem here. In this case, there's a crash. So we'll look at that, but I also have the context knowing what actually happened in the previous session. So that session, right before this session, right, I can see that, and it allows me to see, first of all, is this user running into this crash repeatedly? If so, what are the steps they're taking? That's kind of what we'll walk through inside this user timeline. The other important thing to note inside this user timeline, you can pass through a custom user ID. As you can see, it's anonymized. I don't know who user 003 whatever is, right? But it allows me to, at the top, I can search for that user and actually look up their individual user session. So if there's a loud customer that's having a lot of issues, you can actually look up their sessions and actually find out exactly what happened. You don't have to reach out to them and say, tell me about your device. Are you on Wi-Fi? What version of the app are you using? Instead, you have all of that. So teams like this because they can get right into finding out what the root cause of the problem is, rather than trying to go into Firebase and looking up logs and trying to piece that together with maybe an analytics tool and see how it all fits together. It's a lot more streamlined and provides a lot more context. So it's a lot easier to jump in. So below that, we have the session timeline where we actually capture all the activities or the views the user's in. We have performance data. We call those moments. So we'll talk about that more shortly. But we also capture every single network call. So all your first party or your third party network calls, we'll highlight if they're slow. We'll see some slow network calls in just a minute. And then of course we can see where ANRs are occurring. What view are they in? If there's any low memory warnings or any crashes, we have, again, the context to know what was going on for that user before they experienced that part of the experience. So with all of that, the session timeline here, we lay that out, just like it sounds, into a timeline, in the timeline details. In timeline details, I'll be able to see connectivity. We'll also capture automatically if a user's in low power mode. We have seen around 20% of our users across Android and iOS being in low power mode. And that it tends to cause slow performance, and you just have less resources available, right? So it could lead to some crashes maybe that are hard to solve or slower performance. Those sorts of things will add, again, context into what actually is happening for the user. In this test app, you'll be able to see the different views they're entering. You'll see network calls and the timing of those network calls. You'll even see some performance timers. So again, these are moments. We'll talk some more about those. But what I wanted to show in here was some of those moments, right? So I have, in this case, this is a key flow inside this test app, this call service on start. So you have the ability to tell us when to start that timer and when to stop it. And then you can see what happens inside it, right? The network calls, the low memory warnings, the breadcrumbs in this case, right? It allows you to get a full context as to what actually is happening. And the best part about this is you're not installing multiple SDKs like you have to with Crashlytics, right? You don't have Crashlytics and Firebase Performance, two separate SDKs, but instead embraces a single SDK that allows you to capture all this information with minimal setup, right? So it allows you to gather all that information and then highlight it inside a user timeline. Where I'd like to kind of go next is to show you some of the performance and how we can track performance. As you can see, we're tracking all these network calls, and I see this is an ad SDK in this case, but I can see this call took 4 seconds. And if a network call is taking 4 seconds, a customer's not going to complain about an ad not being shown, but me as a developer or an engineer manager, I care about that because monetization for us is, right, it's what pays the bills. So if ads are slow or they're causing issues, I want to know about that. In this case, I can see this ad call taking 4 seconds, and if I click on that, it zooms me out to this page where I can see all network calls to this specific endpoint. I can look at the error codes, I can filter by those and get all of the user sessions that experience those error codes. But of course, I can also see the performance. So this allows me to see that network call and then zoom out and say, are other people having the same issue? Is it slow for everyone, or is it just this user? In this case, it looks like it's probably just that user, right? I'm not seeing any crazy slowness on this network call. I'm not seeing a bunch of network calls that are taking 4 to 5 seconds, right? So that's kind of how we would get context from not just what's happening inside that session with just the network calls, but I also can see the performance, right, of the users in the user session. Where I want to go next is you can see all your failed network calls. And again, you can zoom out on those and take a look at those. You also can capture all your handled or even unhandled exceptions, depending on the app. So we can capture the handled exception. In this case, you'll get your stack trace. But I'm also able to see what happened right before that, right? Again, the network calls, the views they're in. We can even enable tap coordinates and where the user's tapping, right? What they're clicking on before they run into certain issues. Finally, we get to the crash at the end. Every tool will provide a crash report, right, of what's happening. But what's unique here is you'll get the stack trace and the crash, and also, again, the steps that led up to that. So teams are using this differently than Crashlytics, because Crashlytics, they just get a stack trace for these different things, and they have to try and look for logs and things like that that piece together and figure out what happens. Maybe they have to go to their analytics tool to pull in performance data. Instead, teams use Embrace with a single user timeline like this. They can follow along with what the user did, what they tapped on, what views they entered, if they were in their low power mode or they had slow network performance. We capture all that, and then of course I can see the crash and what led to that. So that's kind of how we help teams gain complete context for every user experience. The next point I want to focus on is surfacing the cause of poor app performance. We've kind of talked about that already with networking. We've talked a little bit about moments and how we do that, but I want to kind of expand on moments and what that looks like. What we're seeing here is this moments page. Moments, again, are key flows within the app. These are defined by the teams that integrate, right, the Embrace SDK. You essentially tell Embrace when to start and stop the timer. That allows us then to put this in a moments page like this, but you also can create dashboards around this. You can segment it based off of user profiles, OS versions, that sort of thing. But what this allows us to do is I can come in and say, let's look at startup. Why are there almost 8%, 9% of people abandoning startup, right? That's not what we want to see. So if I actually click into this, this will take me to the incomplete startups. I can see over time what this actually looks like. And this also allows me to see, is this changing? What does it look like? I'm filtered by abandoned startups, so I can see people who are abandoning. This could be a payment flow. This could be adding an item to cart. So now I can see who's abandoning and why are they abandoning, right? So I see the abandoned percentage, but again, I also have the user sessions that I can then zoom out to and go take a look and find out why are users actually abandoning here. So it doesn't just tell me, okay, there's a problem, but instead I can go say, well, why is there a problem? What's happening? On the flip side of that, I can go and I can actually look at the completed startups, and I can go say, well, let's look at these completed startups, and I can filter in these different buckets and say, let's go look at startups that took greater than 15 seconds. And again, I have those user sessions to go take a look at. So that's one of the ways that we would help surface the cause of poor app performance. Let's wrap up with alerting. It's great to have all this information, and it's interesting to be able to dig through it, but really what it comes down to, like, nobody wants to live in a dashboard, right? Nobody wants to constantly be checking and looking for issues or slowness. Instead, really, we want to know about those things. So if I come to this alert section, our alerting is very proactive. It allows you to set up key flows, and then you can also be notified when those SLAs aren't being met. So if I click on Add Alert, I can choose what kind of alert I want to set. There is a lot of different things you can come in here and set, right? So it could be based off of your network performance. It could be logs, crashes, ANRs, all sorts of things. What I want to take a look at and set an alert for would be abandoned moment percentage. So just like we saw, app startup was slow, and also we saw a lot of people abandoning. So what I want to look at is abandoned moment percentage. If I look at this graph, I can see just about 0.3% of users are abandoning. That's across all moments though. I want to get more particular. I want to go look at my moment name, right? So moment name is startup. And if I hit apply, now you can see what that actually looks like over time, right? 6.5%, not great. That's not what we want to see. The good news is I can come in here and I can set a threshold, and when that threshold's met, we can send a proactive alert via Slack. We can email you. We also have a webhooks integration as well, so we can trigger in a webhook, so that way you hear about those issues. If I were to set, let's say 7, like I care about if it hits 7%, then what that allows me to do is it sets this line here, and I can see when I'm going to be notified of this. And in this case, I'd be notified a lot, right? So maybe I'd get kind of sick of hearing about that notification. But That way I know when those issues are occurring. We can do that for slowness, abandonments, that sort of thing. So that kind of wrapping up, that's how we would proactively address issues. That's how you'd hear about those things, slow performance or abandonments. Now what we'd like to do, I want to turn it back to Colin so we can kind of go through what a customer is saying. Let's go through a customer case study and talk more about that.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Colin. It's always nice to see the platform in action to sort of crystallize what it looks like. But now let's walk through in practice what it looks like. So the next thing we want to do is just walk through a case study. So Tokopedia, if you have not heard of them, they are the Amazon of Indonesia. So they're a very large global e-commerce marketplace platform. And they are growing like crazy. They're very successful. They have over 14 million sellers in the platform, and their platform has over 1.8 billion products. So they're very large, very successful, and obviously their biggest priority is making sure it's very easy for people to visit their app and to complete purchases. And as an example of kind of how big they're growing, they've expanded recently. They're now in fintech, they're working on payments, logistics, and even in retail. So empowering traditional brick and mortar retails to sell additional products through the app in conjunction with online-only merchants. And so this is a great quote that I think summarizes a lot of what we experience when we first talk to mobile teams before they've tried Embrace. And that is that Tokopedia had very limited visibility. So I won't read this entire quote. I've highlighted the key sections, but if this resonates with you, don't worry, you're not alone. This is a lot of mobile teams. They were dealing with very basic tooling to monitor the app. And at a certain point, it just was not feasible because as their app grew to a certain size and complexity and maturity, crashes were not their number one issue. And like Colin Anderson said, like I alluded to earlier, Crashlytics is a great tool for solving crashes, but crashes are not the end all be all. And as your app gets more mature, you're starting to realize that performance issues can dwarf crashes in terms of the total impact on your users and business. So they really needed a solution that was more well-rounded and more holistic to give them that visibility. And so the way he described it is their users' problems were becoming more niche and complex. And that has to do with the sheer amount of variables that come with mobile, right? There are so many devices or so many operating systems. You're constantly shipping new app versions. There's new features. People have different they're shifting their connectivity while they use their app. They're doing different flows in and out of your app. So you need full visibility into the entire user experience to really get a sense of what happened with that user. And so basically all this led up to them realizing they were just completely unable to solve the key problems in their app. So how did Embrace help? Well, we helped them with 3 key challenges, and I'll cover those now. So the first challenge was improving the user experience. So before Embrace, they just did not have enough data to get to the root cause of failed purchases. So users would submit tickets of, I tried to buy this product, I came across this issue, I couldn't fix it. And that data alone was not enough for them to get to the root cause. They would have to contact the user and ask them a bunch of questions to get more visibility to even understand how to make the fix. So you can understand how that is a very inefficient approach to issue resolution. It limits the number of issues they can solve, and it also is asking a lot of users to kind of do a Q&A with you just so you can improve your app. And so what Rico, the head of engineering at Tokopedia, told us is when they started using Embrace user session timelines that Colin just showed us, he said that was like debugging the user is the term he used. So having the full visibility of everything that happened to the user without having to ask them one-on-one to provide more context. And so since they've started using Embrace, they are far more responsive to users' needs. And they can provide a much more highly optimized user experience because they can solve issues much faster without a lot of back and forth with their users. So the second challenge they had was page load completion. So like I said earlier on a couple slides ago, they have 1.8 billion products in their platform. So that means in their app, if you want to take a look at them all, that's 1.8 billion product pages. Think of the scale of that. And basically, if you're a user visiting the app, you can't make a purchase if that product page doesn't load. So anything that doesn't load is costing them revenue. And so they wanted to find a way to make sure all their product pages were loading completely and consistently. With their previous tooling, they couldn't do that. So what did they use? So Colin showed us a little bit of Embrace's app performance functionality. They used that to get visibility into which pages were loading very slow and ultimately having missing elements or failing to load entirely. And from that, they could see the full impact, like which pages were loading the slowest, which ones were failing the most, so they can hone in on those, figure out what was wrong, and fix them. And because of that, they were able to greatly improve their page load completion rate. So they're now loading over 99% of all their page loads, 100% successfully without errors. And it's now one of their important metrics that determines whether an app release is a go or no go. And if they're below that threshold, they know something's wrong, they need to investigate it, they need to fix it before they can ship that new app version into production. And so the third challenge was mean time to resolution. So like I talked about previously, they were relying on user submitted tickets as a way to understand the full impact of issues and dive in and investigate them. So that's not a good approach. It doesn't scale, right? They needed a proactive way to surface issues, see their impact, and make better decisions about which ones to solve. So they used a combination of Embrace features. They used Embrace app performance. They used Embrace alerting, which Colin showed us in the demo. They also used custom dashboards, which we alluded to, but did not have time to show you today. All these features in tandem allow them complete visibility into their whole mobile data so that they can understand exactly how many issues are happening to which user base, what's the impact, and so they know which ones they want to address before they have to rely on user submitted tickets. And because of that, they've significantly reduced their mean time to resolution. So if we had to summarize how Embrace helps Tokopedia, it's really those three key pieces that Colin shared. So they needed to gain complete context into user experiences so that they could resolve every issue more efficiently. And that's how they were able to improve user experience, by not having to rely on asking users for detailed feedback when issues happened. The other thing Colin addressed in the demo was surfacing every cause of app performance. And we covered this with their page load completion issue rate. So they wanted to make sure all their pages could load all the data as much as possible. They're able to boost that to above 99% page load completion because they have visibility into all these performance indicators of all their different pages. And the third was proactively addressing issues, right? As opposed to having to wait for users to submit feedback to know which ones to fix. And we covered that with how they're able to greatly, significantly reduce their mean time to resolution because they have a proactive approach to identifying, visualizing, prioritizing, and solving issues. And so that's a great example of how Embrace can help, how Embrace currently helps Tokopedia and how we help a lot of our customers. So I'd like to go through some quick takeaways as we wrap up this webinar. So what did we cover today? Well, we covered that mobile engineers are frustrated because they're frustrated they have to spend so much time fixing issues because they have a lack of visibility. And this almost always has to do with they don't have complete data sets. They're using limited point solutions. They're trying to supplement it maybe by integrating several other tools together. And the end result is just a lot of time and a lot of toil to get to the root cause of issues. We covered how Firebase Crashlytics, it's a great solution for crashes, but crashes is only one part of your mobile app user experiences. And Crashlytics cannot help you address every type of user impacting issue. You'll notice in the Tokopedia case study, I wasn't talking about any kind of crashes, right? It was failed purchases. It was pages failing to load. It was performance and issues that don't result necessarily in stack traces. And that's the kind of visibility you need if you're going to completely optimize your experiences. And so the third we covered, we went through it with the demo, and I just shared with you a case study, is how Embrace provides complete mobile user experience data so that you can prioritize, you can proactively identify, prioritize, and resolve any issue impacting your users and business.